Gene Benson's story doesn't begin in wild places or a quiet countryside. It begins in Brooklyn, an urban landscape of concrete and bustle. Yet even in the city, Gene's sense of justice and hope for change took root. Inspired by the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and a growing awareness of inequality, he set out to use the law as a force for good. Over decades, Gene built a career at the intersection of environmental protection and social justice, helping low-income communities address environmental and health challenges, leading programs in Roxbury, and serving as executive director of the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions. Along the way, he became a teacher, a mentor, and a local leader here in Arlington, shaping projects from Spy Pond to town-wide sustainability initiatives. Gene's journey shows that real change is not instant. It is earned through commitment, vision, and action, one step at a time. And with that introduction, I am very happy to introduce in person now our guest for today. He is Eugene Benson, or Gene as I will refer to him going forward, who, as you've already learned, has been active in the fields of environmental justice, social welfare, working with vulnerable communities in all different kinds of ways throughout a long, long career. And what we want to do here today is just kind of explore, find out more about what lies in the background of all of this work for Gene, like where does all of this motivation and commitment come from? And then also just kind of talk about the work itself over these years, and then how that gets distilled into the work that Gene has been doing here in Arlington over a good number of years on the local scene as well. So it's kind of a catch-all that includes much of your life and some of the personal part of your life, and that the things that motivate you to do what you've done, and then also a really kind of nice deep dive into the professional accomplishments and adventures.
Great.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. We really appreciate it. One of the, I was given a nice description by my co-producer, Michael Armanius, of your career, and I'm just gonna name a few things, which also were alluded to, a couple of them in the introduction, but just to give people a sense of like the breadth of what it is that you've been doing. So among other things, I'm going to read here, Gene has championed environmental law, equity, and public service by protecting wetlands, open spaces, and also vulnerable and underrepresented communities. And there's an intersection between those two things that we are going to explore as well. Gene has been the executive director of the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions. He has spent more than decades as a lawyer, including as a senior attorney, empowering low-income people and communities of color to confront environmental and public health challenges through his work, leading the Environmental Justice Legal Services Program at Alternatives for Community and Environment, or ACE, in Roxbury, Mass. So that's a lot of words and a lot of, in some cases acronyms, etc. What it boils down to, though, is there's a whole lot of, this doesn't even include your touch on your teaching at Boston University, at Northeastern, the fact that you're a founder of Massachusetts Environmental Justice Alliance, and, oh yes, the work here in Arlington to create, as a founder for things like or co-founding Spy Pond Committee, the Arlington Reservoir Committee, the Sustainable Arlington, blah, blah, blah. I'm getting tired just reciting the number of things that you've done. So all of that is really, there's no quiz, folks. Nobody's gonna have to remember all this. Gene can barely remember all the things he's done himself, I'm sure. But anyway, that is just a way of kind of introducing you as a person who really has lived the values that that, I don't know. That's what I'm about to find out. I have no doubt about that. What I was starting to say was live the values that you grew up with, but that's my first question for you, in fact, this is an unusually full resume of a professional life, I would say. So to me, it betokens, to hear something like that, betokens to me a certain kind of character that says, you are going to, absolutely plant your flag and do the best that you can to uphold the values that you believe in. So where did that come from? And I understand that may be an unanswerable question, but.
Yeah, it really is an unanswerable question, because I've thought about it sometimes, and I don't know where the values come from particularly. My family was pretty apolitical, but by the time I got to college and started reading things and thinking about things, and this was during the Vietnam War era and the Civil Rights Movement era, those movements really touched me and got me thinking a lot about what I wanted to do with my life and what my values were. And it sort of arose out of that.
Yeah, and I'm just going to dig in a little bit more on that. Yeah. When you say those movements, what do you mean exactly? Take us back to that time.
Well, people who were fighting against the war in Vietnam and protesting against the war in Vietnam. You couldn't really do that without knowing what was going on, reading things, understanding things. The same way, looking at what was happening with civil rights and the great disparities in the country, and looking at them and figuring out why they were happening. And so I think those things informed a lot of what I wanted to do. So by the time I left undergrad, I decided, I'd like to go to law school. At that time, I had the foolish idea that I would like to be a criminal defense lawyer and get off all the innocent people who were unjustly charged with crimes. But by the second year of law school, I had worked for a while in a prosecutor's office and had done some criminal defense type work as a law student. And I sort of decided that wasn't the place for me. Mm-hmm. So I started to look what else I could do. And at that time, there were legal services programs where people were providing free legal services to low-income people who couldn't afford legal services. So I thought that would be a good place for me to go. And when I looked around, after I graduated, none of them had any jobs. So I spoke to one of them, and the agreement was that if I joined VISTA, which I don't know if it exists anymore.
I'm not sure it does anymore.
It was called Volunteers in Service to America. It was sort of the domestic Peace Corps in a sense. You got paid almost nothing, but they assign you somewhere for at least a year. And the agreement I had was they would assign me to the legal services program in Maryland, which had just opened an office a block outside Washington, D.C., and only had the money for one lawyer. So that's how I got in the door, in a sense, to do that. And then after the year, they hired me, and that got me into legal services. I did that for a few years. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to open a legal services office in a rural part of Maryland that would serve 3 very rural counties that had no legal services at all up to that point. So I did that for a while. And then for various personal reasons, ended up moving here. Again, a legal services program for a few years. Then I went to work for the state government on things like welfare, homelessness, reimbursements from the federal government. Much of it, this was when Governor Dukakis was governor and President Reagan was president, and we were, let's say, disagreeing with them about how progressive and liberal the welfare program could be here, and that was a lot of what my job was. And then at some point I said, I'd like to do something else with phase 2 of my legal career. I'd like to be an environmental lawyer, because that was the other thing I was very interested in. Give you a little tangent. I grew up in Brooklyn, till I was 13, all concrete and asphalt.
I was going to say,
Right.
not your usual background as an environmental activist.
And you know, a couple of summers we went to the Catskills, but as a kid, all I knew was that I could hang outside all day and play softball, you know. And then when I was a teenager, we moved again, New York City to Queens, but it was similar, you know, concrete and asphalt. But when I went to college, I started looking at things, reading things. The environmental movement took off.
And that was in Western New York, right? That was
in Buffalo.
In Buffalo, right?
In Buffalo, New York.
Something, again, where you're actually interacting with the natural world a little bit more.
Well, not too much. It was a city. It was a larger city than it is now. The steel mills were starting to close down back then in Buffalo. But I started reading things, and, you know, for example, I'd recommend this to folks if they don't know it. A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold really opened my eyes and my mind to a lot about the natural world. And then when I took that job in the rural area, we ended up living on 2 acres with a farm in the backyard. Not our backyard, over the backyard fence. So I got very attuned to that. So when I decided I didn't want to do poverty law anymore, the other opportunity was environmental law, and I got lucky. And I think a lot of my legal career is being in the right place at the right time, but also being very lucky. They were looking for somebody to start a legal unit who had all the experience I did, plus environmental law, which I didn't have. But they couldn't find somebody with everything. So they hired me, and they told me to go hire an environmental lawyer to work with me. And that's how I ended up doing that.
Okay, so one thing I'd like to just, again, ask you a little bit more about is the consistency of the fact that you went to a prestigious law school, for instance, and I would imagine, because, you know, I also went to a high-profile law school, and I know that the vast majority of my classmates had very clear ideas about what they wanted to do, and in some cases it was about working on behalf of others, et cetera, but in many cases it was about what was the most interesting thing to them in the law, potentially the most lucrative thing, et cetera. And those doors were wide open to them. So again, I was in the minority in my own law school as a person who was interested in working with vulnerable populations, most interested in that. Right. Clearly you fall solidly into that category as well. And the work that you did from the time that you got your law degree all the way to the present day has always been through that prism, through the prism of working on behalf of those who either don't have voices of their own or who are impacted in particular ways by the world and legislation, et cetera. How was that just a simple thing for you? Like nothing else tempted you and this is what you knew you wanted? Or tell us a little bit more, like how did you...
You know, it was not a hard decision, because when I knew I wasn't going to do criminal defense law, the other thing I wanted to do was somehow help people, and to me helping people wasn't going to do corporate law or things like that. So it was just, how do I find my place in that world, in that part of the legal world? And I was fortunate in finding somebody who would take me on to do that work, and that's pretty much how it started. And after I was there a year, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for some period of time.
And let me ask you, just you know, as an aside, but again, part of the goal of this series that we are speaking within the context of is both to inform and to potentially inspire others from the stories that are told by folks like yourself. So what I am curious about is the idea that you would be doing something that is quite challenging, and that and by which I mean the odds are stacked against those you're representing to a certain degree, right?
Right.
And that is something you're choosing as a life, to spend your life doing that. Requires a kind of, I think, compartmentalization in order to have a healthy balance in the rest of your life. I found that it was very difficult for myself when I was trying to do that kind of work, not to bring it home with me and not to have it affect the rest of my life in a way that I found just very difficult to deal with. Did you ever have to face that kind of thing? And if so, how did you figure out how to do so?
I don't think that occurred to me the way it occurred to you.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like this is the right thing for me to be doing at this time. And, some of my clients had very difficult situations. I can think of one of my clients and who was having trouble with her husband, and he ran away with all their kids. And she would call me in the middle of the night. And this was before cell phones, things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, feel like, how am I going to help? What tools do I have available to do these sorts of things
Mm-hmm.
to help her out,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, getting stuck
Mm-hmm.
in, what this means to me that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not sensitive enough, James.
No.
but-
There is no reason for you to, second guess anything, any part of your own approach, which frankly is the healthiest possible approach you can have
Yeah.
within doing work that's difficult and in which you are going to sustain a certain amount of frustration and loss.
The other thing that's worth pointing out is that, there have been periods in my career when that was not the focus. For example, when I was working for the state, I wasn't representing vulnerable people. A lot of the work I did was on welfare issues and homelessness issues, but it was a different level than if I were representing people. And then after I left ACE, and I was the head of Mass Association of Conservation Commissions, that again was not representing vulnerable people. That was, what can we do to protect wetlands and open space? Although I will admit at the same time, I was helping a friend of mine start the environmental justice organization in Chelsea, that has done a lot of wonderful environmental justice work over the years. So even when it wasn't the focus of my work, I was trying to do some of that on the side.
Yeah,
ways.
Clearly this is a deep and wide streak that runs right through you.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump forward to the narrative that you brought, the point of the narrative to which you brought us, where you are now kind of firmly ensconced in this combination of working, when you can on behalf of vulnerable populations and always mindful of the impact on them of different policies and initiatives, et cetera, and then just working as an environmental lawyer, an environmental advocate. And then starting to bring that work here to life in Arlington. So how long have you been living in Arlington?
I've been living in Arlington for almost 36 years. I
Okay.
moved here in 1990.
Okay, so good long stretch here.
Really?
And what drew you to the town? Was it just happenstance, like you're looking for a place to live and something opened up? What was it?
We looked at this time, pre-internet, you would look in the Sunday paper or the Saturday paper, whichever it was, for all the housing, houses for sale. And we had a map that had parts of Arlington, but not all of Arlington in it. So we knew we wanted to live close enough in, because we were both working in the Boston area. We wanted to be near public transportation, and we had the slice of Arlington on the map, so we started going to the open houses that were in the slice of Arlington that were in the map, and we found the house.
And have you ended up living in different parts of Arlington over those 36 years? So the house you moved into is the house you're still living in?
Still living in.
All right, good for you. And then tell us, like, how quickly did you become involved in the way that you have been now for a really good number of years in local affairs?
Well, a few months after I was here, I got appointed to the Town Council on Aging, and I was a member of the Council of Aging for one term, which I think was 3 years. And then at that time, what's now Envision Arlington was called Vision 2020. So I got involved, ended up as running, or one of the people working on the Environment Task Group, which was part of it. And at that time, we would go down to Spy Pond. We don't live right on the pond, but we can walk there in 10 or 15 minutes. And often in the spring and summer, the pond was completely covered with green stuff. Couldn't boat in it or anything. So a friend of mine said, we need to do something about this. So through the Environment Committee, we started the Spy Pond Committee, which had the goal of doing something about all of these green blooms that were harming the ecology of the pond. So that probably started 92 or 93. So I ended up chairing that committee for a number of years. And then similar thing happened with Arlington Reservoir. And the big thing happened there was it's an earthen dam, and the state came in and said it's a high hazard place because if it were to overtop or the dam fell, the water would all go down and people would die. So we ended up creating the Arlington Reservoir Committee, partially to figure out what to do with that. And the solution turned out to be that they drove steel sheets into the earthen dam, so it's no longer an earthen dam.
Right.
It's earth covering a metal dam, and that solved the problem. So both the Spy Pond Committee and the Reservoir Committee have continued, and I've no longer done that. And then a fellow I knew in town called a few of us together and said, we need something to look at, like climate change and things like that. And we ended up...
What era was this about?
Sometime in the 1990s. I don't remember the exact year. And we ended up creating Sustainable Arlington, and a few of us stayed in it for many years before most of us, I think, filtered out at one point or another. And I'm glad to say that that's still active in doing that. And at the same time, because I was doing some of these things in town, the state had some funds to help watershed associations that at that point didn't have any money. And the Mystic River Watershed Association, we're in the Mystic River Watershed, had no money and no staff. And the board didn't have the wherewithal, they're all volunteers, to apply for this money. So two other people I had just met and I made a deal with the board that we could apply for the funds, and if we got the funds,
then they would be able to...
They would be able to do it. So the two people and I, and they did more work than I did, applied for the funds and got the funds. And that went to the Watershed Association. And then the Watershed Association board said, all right, you got us this money, you all have to go on the board and do something with it. So the three of us ended up on the board, and I ended up the president of the board. And we hired a staff person, which hadn't had in a number of years. And I did that for a while. And then, then it was time for me to leave that board. And at that point, I wasn't really doing very much else in Arlington other than I think I was still active in...
You're really just slacking at that point.
I was very slacking at that point. And there's this wonderful organization in the Boston area called the Food Project. And the Food Project is about youth, food, and community. And they bring young people from Boston and some of the other cities together with students from the suburbs and the exurbs to work on farming and food justice together. And also the students learn, and then they go into schools and they talk to their peers about, you know, nutrition and good food and healthy food. And the food project runs they give money to food pantries, and they have farm stands in like Roxbury and Lynn, and an opportunity to join that board. So I was on that board, and I chaired the finance committee, then I chaired the board of that committee. So that took up, or that organization, so that took up a lot of time when I wasn't particularly active in Arlington, because I felt like I was being active in the larger community doing that. And then at some point around then, I think it was 1997, I got appointed to the Arlington Redevelopment Board, and I was on the Redevelopment Board for 9 years, 3 terms.
Right.
And decided 3 terms was enough.
Right. You mean that's, you said 1997.
No.
I think we're all the way
Well,
zoomed up to 2017,
2017.
Right?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
And frankly, what you have described is 20 years worth of work,
right. So
for sure.
Thank you for the correction. 2017, and somewhere around there, I had also done a lot of legal work when I was at ACE with a group in Chelsea. And at some point, they wanted to spin off and become their own nonprofit. So I helped them do that. And then we had the first meeting of who was going to be on the board. And they decided I should chair the board. So I chaired the board of that for a couple of minutes.
It's amazing how many times it has just happened, Gene. It's just happened that, oh, I ended up as the board chair. Oh, I ended up as the executive director.
So I did that for 6 years. Then, and here, you know, I just stepped down from the redevelopment board after 9 years. So that takes us to now.
There it does. And let me ask you, I would like to spend the balance of our conversation. I know that we're going to blow right by our 30-minute limit here, and that's not a problem.
You can cut afterward.
No, we will leave the conversation to stand as it will on its own. But I would like to spend the balance of our time talking about your observations, your prognostications even, about the situation here in Arlington. And I want to do that within the following context. I have regular conversations with different officials in town in which we are celebrating yet another example of Arlington's kind of status as being in the vanguard of environmental innovation, adaptation, etc. And clearly there is a very strong green communities feel to Arlington. Right. Within that, however, you have done the work and know the bodies in town that deal with this to a degree that I very rarely get to talk to somebody. And so I would like to ask you a few questions. One is, how should we feel, as far as you're concerned, about where we stand as a community in terms of the things that are most pressing in the area of the environment?
I'll give you a mixed review, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that seems like the most honest one, so go ahead.
Some of the things the town does, I think, is terrific. The Clean Energy Future Committee, I think, has continued to do really terrific work. You know, some of the things like the no fossil fuel ban that got passed through town is an example of the town really doing excellent work. Some of the things we've done to encourage more tree planting in town has really been, I think, very good. Where I think the town could do better is in a couple of areas. One is, I feel like, in a way, and this is not only our town's fault, we're like in some ways we treat ourselves like a bubble and not part of the larger metropolitan area. So we don't, I think, always get to take advantage or advocate for ourselves. You know, an example, and one of the things that we need to reduce our carbon footprint is good, effective public transit. And yet we've been losing public transit over the years. And under the MBTA's Better Bus Project, we will lose more bus routes and buses than before. And I think the town could be doing more itself on advocating for public transit and better public transit in the town. And I know the town has a lot of things to work on and other priorities, but that's clearly, I think, one. You know, I think we did a reasonably good job in implementing MBTA communities, and we're starting to see some of the fruits of that. On the other hand, what I saw on the redevelopment board is that for most projects, some people think the projects are too large, too imposing, and I think we need to have some community conversation about these sorts of things. And is this still the right direction? I think it probably is, but there are some tweaks that we could make along the way to maybe have things look a little greener, feel a little greener at the same time that we're doing these sorts of things.
So the projects you're referring to there are building projects of different sorts.
Building projects of different sorts. And you know, I've been active in the Save the Alewife Brook on the steering committee, and there's not that much Arlington can do because all of the combined sewage going in is from MWA, Cambridge, and Somerville, and Arlington up to this point has been really helpful, so I give Arlington good marks on that, but there'll be more that they can do, and I hope there are more that our elected officials in the State House eventually will be asked to do to try to make a difference about those things. So I overall give the town good marks, but there are some areas, as with everything else, right? Nobody's perfect, where I think things could be improved.
Great. You know, we mentioned much earlier when we were talking about the trajectory of your career that you also have been teaching. And it's not something that has come up since then. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit to talk about how that fits into, you know, your sense of what it is that you are bringing to the world through your work.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because it's actually one of the things that I like and that I like to do a lot, although at this point in my life I decided I wouldn't do it anymore. So, for example, I taught at the Boston University School of Public Health for 8 years, and I co-taught a course with one of the faculty members there that looked at the intersection of environmental law and public health and how they don't quite fit together. But it was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn a lot more about public health and how public health professionals go about doing their work, and to see about how to integrate public health issues into environmental issues. And the students, who were all doctoral students in this class, were all terrific. And if there's anything that will give me faith in the future, it's teaching those students and what they had to say and how they went about looking at the world and what they wanted to do as public health professionals. And at Boston University, in addition to there, in the grad program on city planning and urban affairs, I taught planning and land use law, which was great because it was sort of exactly what I was doing at the Redevelopment Board. And sometimes I would even use the Arlington zoning bylaw as an example in class as to how do you look at a bylaw and what's wrong with this one. And then I also taught environmental law and policy there, which again, you know, filtered into my background, and there was always a piece on environmental justice and the disparate impact of our economy and our industry on low-income people and people of color, and how environmental rules usually aren't responsive to that sort of thing. And again, it was a wonderful way, because you may know this because you taught too. You learn more when you have to teach something than if you're taught the same thing. And so I learned a lot by being ready to do that teaching. And then from all the students, in terms of what they had to say and the questions they asked, and left with more optimism at the end of each semester than I went in with.
Certainly two truisms that you just brought up there that I have to just reinforce, and we'll leave it at that, which is absolutely you learn a lot more about what you know and what you don't know when you try and teach something. And then the second thing is, you know, and this is so trite, but it's all teachers know the truth of this. It's inspiring. It's inspiring work, because you find out that there are people much younger than yourself, at least at this point in my life, who are going to be carrying forward torches that are really important, it feels like, that somebody do. And it feels like, oh, thank goodness.
And some of my
there.
students, I follow what they're doing. They're doing great stuff. Yeah.
That's wonderful. All right, last question, Gene, and that is, again, it's a little open-ended, and we'll see what you think. You talked about all the stuff that Arlington does right, some of the stuff that it could do better, et cetera. And again, you speak from a position of authority about these things. Here's my question. What do you, I ask you to put on your prognosticator's hat. What do you see are the things that are looming in the specifically in the area of the environment, that will be challenges for Arlington as a community going forward? And how do you feel about that, about, you know, our ability to deal with those?
Well, you know, we could take another half hour, so let me try to
I know.
digest that as much as possible. You know, with the federal government pulling back from any climate things, I think we can just expect more climate disruption in the years ahead, whether it's, you know, bigger storms, droughts, combinations of larger storms and droughts. Those are going to be issues. How we deal with what eventually is going to be needing to get off fossil fuels, needing to have a much more resilient electric grid than we have now. Those are challenges that the town can't face by itself. You know, it's part of a regional or a state or even national pieces. The town can do its piece and be ready as much as it possibly can, you know, for climate vulnerability and the things that the town can do. And the town has been doing some things and will continue to do some things, but also participating in the regional area about what can be done. You know, a lot of it is looking at what's it going to be like in 2050, what's it going to be like in 2070, because that's where the climate scientists tell us things might get really dicey. I'm not going to be around in either of those years.
Amen.
But
I hear you.
But, you know, for people who are going to be around, and their children and their grandchildren, you know, this is a time for action. You know, whether it's figuring out how to save the more rural areas, you know, or how to reduce our carbon footprints, or better public transit, or vulnerability. We need to be working on all those fronts, I think, at the same time. And I think we have to also understand that we're becoming a more diverse community, and how we recognize that diversity and use that diversity to make Arlington a better community than it could be otherwise.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's a great place to end. I've been speaking with Gene Benson. I'm not even going to start to go through all of the titles he has held and the things that he has done in and around Arlington and through the Boston area and beyond. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and share as much as you have. And we also, of course, appreciate you being here. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm James Milan. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, James.
ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.